There is some great news coming out of the Ferrari camp as they prepare to start the 2024 Formula 1 season in Bahrain tomorrow with their latest challenger, the SF-24. All throughout last week's pre-season test, the Ferrari outfit were getting to grips on their new challenger and the sort of setup it would need in order to extract the peak performance from it over a race distance and in qualifying. But there was one particular issue that the drivers were paying close attention to all throughout their time in the SF-24 to see whether it had been fixed. And thanks to their feedback both to the team internally and comments now made to the press, it certainly seems to be the case. And that is the wind sensitivity issue which plagued last year's car, the SF-23. The issue which most notably caught Leclerc out in the Miami Q3 session last year, but was also generally hampering both drivers even more so during all 24 races last year, with the wind sensitivity issue contributing to them not being able to achieve any sort of consistency over a stint, with this even affecting them in a more dramatic fashion when going from the same set of compound tyres in the race, with dramatic lap time differences just purely based on the shift in wind direction at a given track. And while this situation improved with car development last year, it was a problem that affected them the entire campaign. But this seems to be quite different for the upcoming 2024 season according to Charles Leclerc, saying the SF-24 represents a clear step forward in alleviating the problem, with his statements backed up by some strong race simulations by both drivers across the 3-day test last week. On our side, it's quite a lot better. Last year's car, I think one of the main weaknesses was the wind sensitivity. Whenever the wind would change a tiny bit, our car will be extremely difficult to drive. Huge differences in terms of balance from one corner to the other. And this year we are in a much better place for that, so it is definitely a step forward on that. It was wanted, we worked on it, and we had the confirmation already from the first day. And to back that statement up, I'm going to now show you some race simulation data from Carlos Sainz on day 2 and compare it to the RB19 as well as the SF-23. And you'll be quite surprised to see how dramatically improved their race pace has become from one year to the next. So for this season, they've paid extra attention in trying to preserve their tyres over race distance, which is something that was quite obviously needed. And it seems to have paid off if Sainz's race simulation in the afternoon on day 2 is anything to go by. In the SF-24, Sainz lapped the Bahrain circuit with incredible consistency across all stints in his race simulation. As you can see from the graphs on screen now, this is the breakdown of that very race sim. To quickly put it into perspective, Sainz was a whopping 0.6 of a second quicker per lap than Verstappen managed in last year's actual Bahrain Grand Prix. And this was done, mind you, with a detuned engine to top it all off. So there is definitely some added variables to put into this race sim, with them no doubt having time still in their pocket when it comes to the actual race day with their engine. Now, how does his stint measure up with that of the best race pace from last year's SF-23, you might ask? Well, let's take a look at that as well. The gains are even bigger when you compare this year's Ferrari with last year's, with the SF-24 lapping a staggering 1.5 seconds a lap, quicker than that of the SF-23. This was evident throughout every stint, but his final stint run on the hard tyre was extremely impressive, where lap after lap during the stint he was able to go quicker than the previous, showing the tyre air didn't even offset the decreasing fuel load. This is quite clearly a big step made over the winter and has left them firmly as the challengers behind Red Bull. And this is an observation that many a team have come to over the first 2 days. But just how have they managed to make this huge leap from one season to the next? Well, there are a number of reasons behind this that will no doubt help to account for such a gain. The Ferrari SF-24 bears a much more striking resemblance to that of last year's dominant RB19, having had the winter to design a completely new chassis around the downwashed side pod concept that the Red Bull outfit employs. Gone is the protruding lower side impact structure that was evident across both of the side pod designs Ferrari utilised last year, with it now firmly housed lower down within the SF-24's floor structure. This frees up a considerable amount of space, which they've used to good effect. The side pods for 2024 now have a steep undercut thanks to the lowering of the cis fairing to help manage the undercut flow and side flow towards the rear of the car. Ferrari have also introduced the lower underbite lip that Red Bull used on their RB19. Again, all these changes are aimed at helping to guide the airflow into the outlet as well as over the side pods towards the rear end. And speaking of guiding the airflow towards the rear end, another feature Ferrari have introduced on the SF-24 is the smallest version I've ever seen of a water slide. It's far less aggressive than that of either of McLaren and Aston Martin's, and finishes, or rather starts, a lot further back in the side pod than either of those two teams. And while these are very, very significant and important milestones before the start of the season, Charles Leclerc remains cautiously optimistic about the Scuderia's chances heading into the first race and of course the entire season as a whole. However, as I've said these past few days, drivability and competitiveness are two very different things. Last year we were struggling a lot to be consistent, because the car was just a little bit all over the place whenever there was some wind. But that doesn't necessarily mean, especially in qualifying, that we will win a lot thanks to that. And that doesn't mean anything compared to Red Bull. We still have to work a lot, and then we'll see how competitive we are next Friday in qualifying. My feeling is that Red Bull is still quite a bit ahead, but we have a much stronger base compared to last year. I remember last year I finished the test and it was very, very difficult to understand in which direction to develop because the car was just so inconsistent. It was very difficult to understand what were the main weaknesses. This year it's a very different story. We know exactly where we need to improve. Where are the weaknesses, the main weaknesses of this car? And this gives us a bit more hope for the development of it. So Leclerc, although he's very happy with what the team have produced over the winter and given him for the start of this season, is very well aware of how much of a challenge and climb ahead of them the team has if they want to be able to mount a season-long title challenge to that of the mighty Red Bull team. And I think this is everything all the Ferrari fans need to be feeling as we head into tomorrow's first practice sessions. And I do actually think after the last near 20 years, you guys are now fully aware of never being too excited before the start of a season. And it's just something we need to do. I think everyone wants a challenge from someone. And those two main challenges are probably going to be from Ferrari or Mercedes. Now, I personally would rather have a Ferrari title challenge against the likes of Red Bull. So let's just see where we end up after the first couple of races in terms of race pace, difference between the two cars, and where Ferrari can go with their development path. Right guys, thank you all for watching. That's the video. If you've enjoyed it, leave a comment down below, subscribe if you're new, and I will catch you all in another Formula 1 video.